2025, it's 9 AM and this is the meeting.
How are you
Minutes.
guys doing, Mike?
Natural resources and.
Thank you.
All right, well, technical adjustment, off we go again. This morning, we're having sort of an annual check-in visit with ISO New England, our quiet partners for the South, who send us a lot of energy every day. So Ms. Adams, would you like to join us at the table? And we've scheduled half an hour to help everyone on the committee come up to, I don't know, if we've had ISO in since you.
Yeah.
I thought so a year ago, so it's like a check off.
I was excited to be Right.
And I think, you know, we're happy, I know you have a lot of slides here, so I think amongst all the things, you can highlight things that we ought to be keeping in mind.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone, Sarah Adams. I'm State Policy Advisor with ISO New England. Myself and our Director of External Affairs, Eric Johnson, were in with you last January. So I'm hoping I can go through the more introductory material a little quickly. If you have questions, I'm happy to pause. It looks like I'm not able to share my slides in Zoom. If you could just give me permission, I can share. So it's both on the screen.
While that's setting up, I think, you know, one of the things I'm guessing you're very well aware of it, and we're not working on it yet, but we've been working on rewriting and reforming the renewable energy standard. So if you can be talking about the evolution of the grid,
Yep.
more bi-directional, something like that, that'd be.
Absolutely. All right, so I have just a few introductory slides to remind you all of what the ISO's 3 critical roles are. First and foremost, we operate the power grid. Reliability is our #1 priority. We also administer the wholesale electricity markets, and we plan for the future of the energy system.
What was the second one again?
We administer the wholesale electricity markets.
Sorry, thanks.
We administer the wholesale electricity markets.
Thank you.
And then thinking a little bit more about that third role, our vision builds on that by thinking about where we're going. And we're really prioritizing the state's goals and clean energy policies to think about how we can maintain reliability while helping the state to meet those goals. I just wanted to highlight some things that we don't do as well. We don't have anything to do with retail electricity, though wholesale rates do certainly feed into retail rates. We don't own any infrastructure other than our headquarters in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and our backup facility in Windsor, Connecticut. We're independent of any of the companies that participate in the markets. We don't have any jurisdiction over fuel infrastructure, so that is particularly important given how dependent New England is on natural gas for electricity generation currently. And we don't have any siting authority, so we're not a permit granting authority. We're not making decisions about which generation projects get constructed.
Can you say a little bit about how, when you talk about an ISO vision, so you're organized by under federal law, right? So I'm guessing you have things you would need to do from that side, but do the utilities that are in our region end up acting like, in a way, a group of customers, and they talk to you about what they would like from you? So you have to mediate between the requests of different utilities in the area or states. Who sort of helps shape your vision for how you evolve?
Our vision is primarily based on our state's goals, and our states and also our utilities are some of the stakeholders that provide oversight to the ISO through NEP. So through the New England Power Pool, which is our primary stakeholder body. So if you've ever gone to a planning advisory committee meeting or a markets committee meeting, those are all NEP pool groups. And that's where we get a lot of our input from on things like our vision, on things like all of the planning documents. So the utilities, the transmission owners, they all participate in these. And now we're going to get into some more of that grid transformation discussion. So first, moving towards the state's goals is a huge endeavor. It's going to require a lot of renewable penetration that we don't currently have on the system. So we've identified 4 pillars that we think are necessary to support that transition reliably. First being that significant amount of renewables. We also need balancing resources to help even out some of the intermittent generation that we see from solar and wind. And we need energy adequacy. We need to add we need a dependable, sufficient supply of energy reserves to manage through extended periods of severe weather or supply constraints. And we also are going to need significant new transmission to integrate the renewable resources and to get the energy from where it's generated to where it needs to be used. New England is currently a summer peaking system. This is New England at large. I understand that there may be parts of Vermont that peak in the winter, but as a region, we peak in the summer. However, we are anticipating that we're going to actually switch to a winter peak by the 2035 timeframe. And be roughly a tripling of what we've seen as our historic winter peak fee. And this is because of the electrification of heating and transportation, which are really going to drive up winter peaks. As I mentioned, we do work really closely with our states to consider what their policies are. These are inputs to our system planning studies. And this is just a snapshot of a couple different goals that states have for emissions reductions and for renewable deployment. Now what we're looking at is annual production on the system. So we have 3 times here. 2000 is the first year of wholesale electricity markets data that we have. 2022 is our last full year of data. And 2040 is from a recent study that we completed, our future grid reliability study, that looked at what would the system have to look like if the states were to meet their decarbonization goals. So you can see that we've already had a pretty significant change in the resources on the system, moving from oil and coal to mostly natural gas in the 2022 timeframe. But if we are going to meet the state's goals, we really need to move the needle on the renewables, which haven't seen much change in the last couple of decades. So we're projecting that we need to be at about 50% for electricity production or 56% from renewables in the 2040 timeframe to meet the state's goals.
Quick question, so I'm a little surprised, good, it's nice to be surprised, and although it's kind of in a bad way. Renewables are 11% in 2000 and 11% in 2022, which can you explain that one a little bit? It seems like we've been both building wind, we've been building solar. What's going on there? Is it?
Yeah, I will say that the 11% is, I do think, undershoots the renewables a little bit because that is only grid connected renewables. So there are a lot of distributed behind the meter resources that aren't included in that 11%. And I have a little bit more data about behind the meter resources and how we think about those a little later, but I will say I think 11% does kind of understate what we actually have in the region. That's just what's connected to the ISO grid.
So it's not dispatchable, it's not.
Right. So in 2022, most of the electricity generation for New England was no or low emissions. With about half coming from natural gas, about a quarter coming from nuclear, and about another quarter cumulatively coming from renewables, hydro, imports, just percentages, just 2% from oil and a percentage of a percent from coal. And imports is largely hydropower that's coming from Canada. And another way that we plan for the future of the power system is by studying kind of generation that wants to connect to the grid through our interconnection request queue. And this queue gives us a really good snapshot of what future resources might be. So we've changed a lot from the proposals we were seeing in 2017 compared to what we were seeing just earlier this month, from about half being natural gas and roughly another 44% being wind. We're still at 44% for wind, but we have 46% of our proposals are battery storage, which is the largest percentage of requests that we're seeing. We're hardly seeing any requests for natural gas. And the solar bucket does also include some solar plus storage, so there's even a larger amount of storage in here than that 46%. We work really closely with our utilities and our states to forecast for the future needs of the system. And one of the ways that we do that is we publish our capacity, energy, loads, and transmission, or our SELT report every May. This takes a look at what we think energy efficiency deployment might be, what we think deployment might be for heating electrification and transportation electrification. And we get that information by looking at what the state incentive programs are and hearing what we think the adoption rates will be in each state. So you can see that we are projecting really significant growth in all of these areas, in energy efficiency, which will decrease demand, and also in heating electrification and transportation electrification, which will significantly increase demand. Yes,
Sorry, on that last
sure.
slide. Something that I don't totally understand is the purple bars, because it says energy efficiency, but you have it increasing in the next 10 years. I assume that that's because of that it's really energy efficiency also accounting for growth. But tell me about why that is higher.
So energy efficiency increasing, it could be things like incentive programs at the state that help people buy more energy efficient light bulbs. So we're taking a look at programs like that, and we're projecting that there will be growth in energy efficient technologies.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is not it, the y-axis there is like number of appliances or something.
Right.
Okay.
So this is megawatts of energy efficiency. It's kind of tough to think about. This is a reduction that we would expect to see in demand. So if we're expecting to see a 19 and almost 2,000 megawatt reduction in 2023, we expect to see about a 2,500 megawatt reduction in 2032.
Like the megawatts.
Right.
How?
Chair.
No, but
Still.
The line of questioning that you have opened. It's curious, it is, a good thing. Years ago, ISO was in charge of playing a role or to bring new power online. And the policy back then was to pay some kind of bonuses to people who generated new sources of power. And we went down to ISO and said, you guys are nuts. Or you're doing a job that you shouldn't be doing. We have an efficiency Vermont program that brings power onto line by making it available because we're not using it anymore. And they looked at us like we were nuts. And 2 years after that, 1 year and a half, 2 years or 3 years, whatever it was, ISO began to recognize states that produced power by not using it through efficiency utilities. And it was probably a kick in the backside to other New England states that hadn't begun to do what we haven't been doing for some time. But it's hard to get them to move sometimes. Because ISO, like the rest of us, get set in our ways. Sometimes they respond.
we can still, energy efficiency fit into the 4% state money.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And thank you. I was about to.
Wasn't using the right vocabulary.
Yeah, energy efficiency and demand response resources aren't able to participate in our forward capacity market because a reduction in demand is essentially the same as producing energy. So we do recognize that as a city resource.
And
ISO didn't used to recognize that as a thing, and they came around.
okay, that's now making more sense.
My native
Thank you.
Vermont grandfather regarded money he avoided spending as being equal to income.
Yeah, it's a good account.
It's that old ISO New England saying, a penny saved is a penny earned.
So another thing that reduces peak demand is all of those behind the meter resources. So we have a lot of behind the meter solar in New England, so that would be a resource if the state has had solar on the roof and the state has used that energy, it's not connected to the grid, it's just offsetting demand here. That's behind the meter. We don't have visibility on that. The distribution utility would. What we see that as is just a reduction in demand. So we don't see what it's producing. We just know that we're using less electricity than we forecasted, and that's because these behind the meter resources are producing energy. So if you look at the orange line on this graph, that is what we would expect our gross peak demand to be, were it not for things like behind the meter generation and energy efficiency. So if you look down at the green line, that's where we end up when we subtract those things out. Or actually what we're doing is adding what we think the energy efficiency and behind the meter in would be to come up with that gross demand number. So in 2023, these types of resources reduced peak demand by about 11%, and we expect to see a similar, slightly higher reduction in peak demand through the rest of the decade at nearly 12% in 2032. We've seen really significant growth in these behind the meter solar resources in New England. We've nearly doubled since we've significantly more than doubled since 2010. We didn't have a whole lot at all, and we expect that to double again by 2032. So this will be something that we'll need to continue to track to make sure that we are accurately forecasting what we actually need for energy on the system. All of that solar has really changed the shape of the demand curve. So we call this the duck curve. And what you see is that dotted gray line at the top is where we would expect demand to be if it weren't for all of the solar production. The solid gray line is where we end up, and that yellow in the middle is the production that we can attribute to behind the meter solar. So we're pushing the peak much later in the day than we would expect it to be. And we've had several historic lows in the last few years because of this.
I see that the bottom of that graph, 6,000 megawatts, how worried are you that we're gonna dip below zero anytime soon?
Well, if we do dip below zero, then we can start exporting energy. So we are traditionally, as a region, an importer of energy. We're a net importer. About 14 to 20% of our electricity comes from New York or Canada. But we might just be able to lower that import number.
Okay, great, super, thank you.
Okay, so now I have some transmission updates. I believe we didn't get to a lot of this content when I was here last year, so I can move through these, and if we have time, I have some information on some ongoing studies that I can get into. Otherwise, I've included the links for all of you. So as the region's regional transmission organization, we are required to study the future of the power system, and we typically summarize the needs that we identify in our regional system plan. So that is a 10-year looking forward document. We've just completed our 2023 regional system plan. I've included a link to that full document here. And I also have included links for just a 2-page summary if anyone is interested in reading that more digestible version. But this is the result of just a public stakeholder process. The feedback was gathered through our planning advisory committee, and we also hosted a public meeting in November to get feedback from folks. Part of that feedback was that the document should be a little shorter and more accessible than it has been in the past. So we did try to take that to heart, and hopefully it is a more accessible document. Our system planning efforts have resulted in really significant investment in transmission infrastructure. Since 2002, we've invested nearly $12 billion in the grid, and we're expected to invest about another $1.5 billion through 2027.
Who's we?
The states. So the region as a whole, and I can skip ahead a couple slides just to explain. If a transmission investment is identified that has a regional benefit, then that cost is shared among the 6 New England states according to the load by state. So Vermont is 4%. So Vermont would have paid about 4% of that $12 billion investment since 2002. And one of our goals is to identify whether the investment would be a regional benefit or whether it should be localized. So in the instance where there's a transmission upgrade and we've identified that it doesn't have a regional benefit, then the transmission owner would pay for that. That would be a localized cost. So we wouldn't share in that instance. Private developers also sometimes propose elective transmission upgrades that they pay for. We have 8 elective transmission upgrades in our interconnection queue currently that would deliver about 14,000 megawatts of clean energy to load centers. As I mentioned, part of the reason that we need new transmission is to move energy from where it's generated to where it needs to go. We have a lot of wind that is proposed up in Maine. There's not a lot of load up in Maine, so we need a way to get that generation down to load centers in southern New England.
So what if Southern Maine doesn't want to build the lines to take the excess power in northern Maine or north of Maine that you were talking about, and they seek to obstruct and prevent the shipping of power down to the Boston and Massachusetts areas? What's the problem that causes, and what's the remedy that's available?
Well, the problem is that the power would potentially get curtailed, so the wind farms would generate the power, but we wouldn't be able to send it anywhere, so that's just kind of lost energy.
Unless if it piles up in Maine, it can't get to Massachusetts, then it's suddenly available at a much cheaper rate for people in Maine because it's rather than throwing
The
away. those
transmission lines can only accommodate so much power, so it's not that it can just pile up in the transmission lines. There are constraints on the line, so that a lot of that power would just be wasted in that instance.
So, Mr. Shiro,
You
just have described what's going on or what exists, which is, we know that north of Maine, there are times when there's plenty of power available to be used, but it can't get through, it's constrained, it can't get through to Massachusetts, and then therefore can't be sold. It has to be thrown on the ground and spilled like milk. As power does in the state of Vermont between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, when no one wants to buy it, it gets thrown away. So what does ISO New England, what power and authority does it have to say to Maine? Quit holding up the power, quit opposing the ability to send power to Massachusetts. It's costing all of New England money to throw it on the ground and waste it.
We don't have that authority, we're not a permit granting authority. One thing that you asked about solutions, one thing that I will offer is that energy storage is a potential solution were we to have some more viable long duration storage technologies. We could store that power and
Who's we?
I mean the region, so the wind farms could add a storage component that could then store the power that can't get through the transmission lines within the constraints and send it at times where there weren't those constraints. So that is one potential solution. There are also a number of lines that are proposed that hopefully will get constructed. There's a lot of federal funding right now that will help transition and hopefully get built. But we are out, ISO's out saying that we really need this transmission. That's what we can do is say, we've done the studies and we're telling you as a region, we need more transmission. And unfortunately, that is where our authority ends on building transmission, is being the expert and saying, we've done the studies and we're telling you we need it.
Well, we've been dealing with that sort of issue for 10, 15 years.
Right, there's under the lake, cables being proposed. Right, and then there may be another large line going down using the existing right of way. Okay.
And this slide does actually get to another, I think, small way that we could potentially help, that I could help get some new transmission constructed is that we recently completed the 2050 transmission study. This is the longest look forward we've ever done for a study. Typically we look at a 10-year planning horizon, this is much longer. And as part of that longer term transmission study process, we are proposing some additional tariff changes that would allow us to then operationalize the solutions that we identified in that study. So actually advance them to a competitive solution process that we would help the region select which solutions they wanted to move forward and solicit proposals for those solutions.
You put out a list of options, if you do this.
Yep.
This would be the result, if you do this next thing, that would be the result,
Yep, and actually.
but you can't order this stuff,
No,
so we depend on your, our ability to persuade ISO to turn around and attempt to persuade other states to do what would be in the best interest of all those other states if everyone cooperated.
I suppose we're in the position of being kind of a technical expert, and we hope that the studies that we're producing let folks see what way we think it makes sense for the region to move forward, but we cannot compel them.
Right.
Sometime in this discussion, discuss the lessons from the Northwest Reliability Project and how they apply to what we're learning today. Mr. Chair.
You're apolitical and we're talking about political. So let's keep going.
Then I will just wrap up. I've included links to several studies that we've recently completed or that are ongoing that support the future grid. And if I have time, I will just highlight a couple that I've pulled out here. The first of its kind, operational impact of extreme weather events. We worked with the Electric Power Research Institute on this effort to develop what we're calling a probabilistic energy adequacy tool KEAT. We love acronyms at the ISO. And our hope is that that tool will allow us to then, as system conditions change, we can update the inputs to that tool and get a new list of energy shortfall risks. So it's going to help us be more agile, we hope, and help identify risks while we still have time to address them. So we released a final report on that effort in December. And found that risks are pretty manageable through 2032, but we are really dependent on timely additions of renewables and increased imports from some transmission lines that are proposed to mitigate the energy shortfall risks that we're seeing. The next step in this effort is the development of a regional energy shortfall threshold or REST. And that will reflect the region's level of risk tolerance with respect to energy shortfalls. So we've just introduced the scope of work for this effort, and work will continue on this in 2024.
Are you anticipating any shortfalls next decade or when do we, people often ask this committee, but you guys keep talking about heat pumps and
Yes.
EVs. Are you sending us off a cliff? Like we're gonna run, great idea, other than we won't have enough power. Yeah. Every year we ask this question, and so far the running short always is on the horizon, like 7 years out. I don't know. You can put a time frame on it.
Yeah, so we found there are certainly risks, but we found that they are manageable through 2032. And manageable, I think, is a different definition for different people. If we call our oil and our coal generators to produce power, those risks are manageable. That's not an acceptable answer for some people. So I think that to what extent you feel the solutions are manageable is up for debate, but we found that we think the region can ride through those shortfall risks that we're seeing through the decade. And then just very quickly, I will note that we recently completed that 2050 transmission study. We published the final report in November. And the one big takeaway I wanted to highlight is that we are predicting a tripling of winter peak. So that is a really significant change for the region. And we can significantly reduce the amount of overloads that we're seeing by 2050. If we can decrease that peak from 57 gigawatts to 51 gigawatts, so that would be the priority for the region. That would certainly be what we would like to see, and that would also save the region about $9 billion. So that's a really significant savings if we can shave that we expect.
Right. So quick follow-up question, we've worked for a long time in Vermont on demand reduction. So although people, the lion's share of attention goes to new generation, it sounds like demand reduction is still a cost-effective tool in terms of managing the growth that we'll see, by being able to like shape the load curve.
Yep, absolutely.
Shave the peak. So if I understand you correctly, we will have a peak in winter and a peak in the summer, which we currently have, or is it that you're shifting it?
We are shifting, we expect by about the 2035 timeframe, the region will be winter peaking. So we have historically peaked in the summer. We are expecting that with heating electrification, with transportation electrification, we will start peaking in winter.
Wow, okay, that is a very big.
Yeah, big paradigm shift. Yeah.
That strikes me as counterintuitive. It's getting warmer. Why does the usage go up more than in the summer?
Well, as more folks move from oil or gas heat to electric heat pumps, that's going to drive up electricity. So it's about the source that folks are using.
More with electricity.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
To make the sunshine.
Great, I know I'm out of time, so I've included a lot of links for you all, just for some
We asked that
resources.
questions.
Sorry.
Why don't we spend another 5 to 10 minutes?
Sure.
We can see and hear your presentation, which is very helpful, and then we can follow up on more details.
Sure, then I will just include, every March or so, we publish our regional and state grid profiles, so these will be getting updated very shortly. We also have moved from a physical publication of our regional electricity outlook to one that is dynamic, that just kind of lives on the website, so I believe this link will take you to that page, but we are constantly updating that. We also, in October 2022, published our first vision statement. So that's where our mission comes from, or where our vision statement comes from. It also talks about our mission, which are 3 critical goals. So I provided this document for you all if you're interested in that. And we have a consumer liaison group that meets 4 times a year. This is the one area where the ISO really interacts with ratepayers. These are free, they are open to the public. We host some hybrid, so we move them around the region. There's an in-person meeting. We were just in Burlington in September 2023. So we do come to all of the states at some point, and we also have the WebEx component. This is managed by a coordinating committee with representatives from each of the states that really pick the topics and the speakers for the meeting, and we facilitate and help coordinate those meetings. And then I just wanted to provide all of our socials and remind you all that we have a really great app. If you're interested, yep. I know I love the app.
Best app.
So if you're interested in tracking the whole bill electricity
We don't
prices,
have-
the resource mix in real time.
There's only a certain level of nerding out that I'm willing to admit to, and the fact that you're so excited about this app is wonderful.
It's getting better. Prove it. It's also, it really is interesting to see what's going on. Senator John.
I've gone down to ISO on numerous occasions. And had the tour and presentation, and then we go into the room with a big conference table on it, and curtains on the side of the room. And they say, well, this is a time to get together and ask questions. And the last time I went down, I said, I have a request, please don't open the curtains. And when you open the curtains, there's there are all the grids and the lines and the dotted lines, the blinking lights. And everybody can look on the grid and find out where their home is. And then all the questions that happen during the time for us to ask questions have nothing to do with the politics of the, of power and what the future is and what the problems we're trying to solve. It seems we've been welcomed to a room to look at something that eliminates our ability to ask questions about ISO and how we deal with constrained power in Maine. And what shares we have to pay for power lines to New York City in exchange for the same share of our power lines being paid for by people from New York City, which is dollars to donuts in drifting west. Stop it. We go down to ISO and we don't get to the basic issues. We are diverted by this dog and pony show of everybody asking questions about what they see on this exciting map with all sorts of blinking lights on it, and we never get to what you folks do. And when someone requests that we not be diverted, you guys open up the divert the hell out of us. So I wonder, Mr. Chair, I'm giving questions to an innocent witness here who has a job to do about complaining about ISO's behavior that keeps people in the dark when we go down to find out the bigger.
And although,
questions.
to be fair, to ISO, I understand the distraction. Because I've been there with you when this happens, well, the legislators in the room are the ones. The bright shiny object distracts, and they could stick to their questions if they wanted to.
Well, there are plans for who we are. Instead of
Well,
having us understand that some questions that have to be answered.
So I didn't bring a bright shiny board to distract you today, so I hope you got to ask all your questions.
Did you have questions that you were unable to ask at that meeting?
We didn't get to the main thing much, and we didn't review the.
But did you feel that you have the like, so for example, our person, Ms. Adams could, for example, maybe respond over email if there were specific questions that you wanted to ask but were unable to ask? You could send Ms. Adams, if that's correct, an email about things, or I'm happy to work with you if there were things that you didn't get to ask.
Which is, why do you open up the curtain and change our
Oh,
patterns? Yeah,
okay.
it's the basic question.
Well, perhaps if there were other questions that percolated that you felt you couldn't ask, we could follow up at.
Typically, folks do come to Holyoke because they want to see the control room, so we're happy to do presentations over Zoom that. Like this, that don't have that distraction, but in my experience, if people are coming to Holyoke, it's because they want to see the board.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to take me to Macy's to see the electric trains before Christmas, because I wanted to.
Okay, we've met the enemy and they are us, okay? So, any other
Six. There's bright shining lights.
any other questions from Ms. Allen? Right,
Thank you. Alright,
thank
I
you.
have business cards, you can certainly always reach out to me, with any questions you have via email. Or, reach out to Gabrielle, and she's happy to have on any questions.
So my question is, do we learn anything today about how to solve or the choices we have before us when it comes to dealing with what's going on in Maine? And the distribution of power?
Well, so let's finish with that question, because what's the ISO's role in, there's the politics of Maine, you're stopping the transmission. I don't know that ISO has, am I wrong in thinking that ISO really doesn't have a role in helping Maine choose whether or not to build a power line, like they help cost it out? This is a solution that has these benefits, these costs. technical analysis, and then that's it for you guys, right?
That is our role, so the folks that I think perhaps we would like to talk to are. The developers in Maine, I think, are not doing their due diligence with working with communities, and that is the source of a lot of opposition. Also, the permit granting authorities in Maine are the ones that do actually have the authority to say, we would like to build this despite the opposition, we can't do that.
Because they wanna build it because they make money building, so why they wanna do it, or because it will solve a grid problem.
Who's the they?
Yeah, who's the they?
No, in
who
your
are you?
question,
The developers,
I can't speak for the developers and locations, I assume that they are primarily interested in making.
they build it
But that doesn't
anybody,
mean that it
they.
doesn't solve a grid reliability problem.
okay. So thank you very much. And, Senator McDonald, if you wanna have more conversations about Maine, we could figure out a way to look at it. I didn't know. Yeah, so let's. Happy to learn more.
Right.
And we got.
I wanted to bring in the Northwest Reliability Project sometime this morning for just a couple of minutes as an example of
Are you next?
how things happen.
Here, I'll-
Okay,
I do also, I have a transmission map, if that is of interest, I
Oh,
have,
you did?
yes.
Now I'll wear it out.
how many copies do you?
This is like my version of.
I brought a few, for some other committees, I can leave one too.
Right, we're gonna have to have a.
I will.
We're gonna have to draw straws at the end of the
We get to keep this one too?
I need at least one of these for house energy.
Dang
But
it,
I can
house
give you- I can
energy.
give you one more thing.
We can maybe have totally.
Or,
Yeah.
yeah, if we could make a
Maybe.
copy.
That's gigantic, but okay.
That's
so cool.
Hey, look right there, look where we are.
Oh,
Oh, wow. Oh, and then there's Hartford one. Oh, wow.
Gabrielle, is there a electronic version? So.
Yes, so it is available on the website, I can follow up with a link.
Yes,
You can see it left down.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So what's the red is? Oh, wow.
Here it is, another bright shiny object.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
And you think you don't get first.
Yeah. Dude, I think we're still live.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, great.
Okay, so we have lost our other witnesses
Oh, my
to the
God.
hall,
Thank you.
but I'm supposed to on spot. And
You
you
always
always,
catch me.
everybody.
Oh, I know. You always sound amazing.
Yeah, that applies to.
Sorry, Mike.
Right.
I'm not bad for you, something.
I would have felt bad.
That's a good job, that's a good lovely end, have us not ask questions that don't, she can't answer.
I don't get actor, she's here to do her job.
She's your job just fine. No, excellent, yeah.
Yeah, I hear, it sounds like you are frustrated with the situation, so perhaps we could work together to write something to the ISO that express that. But I don't think it was totally clearly communicated.
I asked her how we deal with it, and her job in part is to don't get into that.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly, so maybe there is someone who is there that we could ask those questions of.
She's set up here to tell us
I know.
how they play and how they help us.
They're a pretty big organization though, so there's
Well, we
probably.
mean, for a good organization. They do what they do. Well,
They're highly regulated, they have statutory authorizations, they have things statutory prohibitions of what they can do. She actually answers the question. They provide technical analyses for different strategies to deliver power around the region.
so I asked her about what the technical stuff they had dealt with to give possible solutions to what goes on in Maine, which gives Maine a leg up on the rest of the New England states to have lower electric power than the rest of the states by constraining the ability to get electricity through Maine.
Yes, and
And
this person may not have been the person to respond to that question. I think we would need to talk to like the,
when you go down there to talk to them, they open up the curtain And you have questions about the railroad, model railroad that you're looking at.
I don't know if we're gonna get further on your point.
It's not my point, it's New England Grid's point.
So we are changing gears back to familiar territory. And that is S 213, inactivating the regulation of wetland river corridor development and dam safety. We've taken a lot of testimony the last several weeks on what's going on out there. We've got our primer on river corridors, floodplain, wetlands, dams, and more. And I've asked the folks that we've been learning from to come back to the committee this week, and I'll also ask ANR to come back this week with suggestions about if you have thoughts on the bill as introduced to improve it, please share those with us. Again, we'll hear from ANR on Tuesday. The secretary's been away, so there's a team working on an answer, as I understand it, at ANR. They won't be, we couldn't schedule them prior to Tuesday, so we'll hear that part. Meanwhile, we have a team of folks in here to help us get going. And so with that, I invite Ms. Oates to join us and the table, unless you want to switch up the batting order, which we always can do.
Well, actually, if you're amenable, all three of us are going to work from the same document, so if you wanna start at the beginning, we have Karina go on wetlands, then I can jump in.
Yeah.
And Jared
Sure.
perhaps.
Yeah, and we're in choose your own adventure land,
Great.
whatever works. We know we'll hear from all of you, and if you've worked out a sequence, we're good with that.
It allows you to start from the very top, Bill, work your way down.
Jude, are you able to pull up the document that Jared sent you? I gave you, I can pull it up. Yeah, but that's what we do.
You have to accept the Zoom link. Do you see it? If you don't, I can resend it. No, I see it.
And as we get going, just for people who'll be watching, you can reintroduce yourself. Thank you.
Fair enough. Sorry, there's this.
Good morning.
Oh, you can.
Where's the good stuff? Good morning. For the record, I'm Karina Daly, restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council. And today we're gonna just walk you through the proposed changes, the proposed edits to the bill. And happy to answer any questions along the way. I'll start with wetlands, and then Lauren Oates will go over the rivers piece, and Jared will go over the dam safety. Does that make sense?
Yes, please, thank you.
Okay. So in the wetlands section, under the net gain of wetlands, section 918, we've added the red language that you see above. We added a condition just to ensure that the wetland net gain doesn't conflict with restoration projects. So wetlands, floodplain restoration, and dam removal. So we just wanted to make that crystal clear that when there are restoration projects related to wetlands, such as floodplains, floodplain restoration, and dam removals, that those conditions are exempt. So pretty simple. So that was the first one. And then under section 19B, we added a greater than 5,000 square feet
description modifier to the language, which was based on Laura Lapierre's recommendation in her testimony. And just to be clear, that 5,000 square feet is when wetlands general permit kicks into an individual permit. So when there's impact of 5,000 square feet currently, that's when they are practicing the mitigation ratio of 2:1. And that's consistent with the Army Corps of Engineers as well, so that's a consistency between the state and the federal wetland rules. In Vermont.
That's a pretty fine threshold, that's just over.
A tenth of an acre, good. Or I think Jared said 3 bowling alleys. The visual way to see it. Do you have a question?
No, that I basically was,
Yeah, how much is that?
yeah,
So that will just make this whole process easier when we go into rulemaking because we have that 5,000 square feet threshold already.
Sitting down,
That's assuming that you're dealing with a wetland.
Correct.
So the question I usually ask at this point is about the Black Mountain Swamp, which went through the rulemaking process and completed the rulemaking process to designate it as a wetland. And then after everything had happened and the designation was ready to take place and Elkhart supported the designation because it had followed all the legal procedures to be designated a wetland, it was removed from wetland status. So all the stuff you're telling us about here, which is
Yeah.
terrific, doesn't apply to that thing which had gone through the rulemaking process to be designated a wetland and had been approved to be a wetland. That is not today.
I think
Well,
it is
just to
what,
be clear, it is a wetland, it's a class 2 wetland, so it's a Vermont significant wetland, so all of what I'm speaking to does apply. It is not a class 3 wetland, it was petitioned to be a class 1 wetland. And it is still a candidate to be a class 1 wetland, but it hasn't been granted class 1 status. So it is still a jurisdictional wetland according to the state and still significant as a class 2. And it is a candidate to be a class 1, which this would apply to class 1 wetlands as well. But you're right that it hasn't moved through that process.
Okay, so
We're still hopeful it will.
if you happen, is there a way that one can make a phone call and the decision to remove it can be made to reinsert it?
There is a way, and I think the community needs to come behind that more. So I think, a convening process of working with the community again to do that would be important.
Well, it gives a lot of solace on how we're going to deal with mitigating and preventing floods if. Mr. Chair, thank you.
yeah, so with that cautionary tale in mind, are there places in which the difference between being designated class 1 and class 2 leave us vulnerable to achieving less than we would hope or imagine through statute? I'll just leave that. I mean, that's how I would translate that question, rather than thinking about that particular swamp and sort of a unhappy story from some people's point of view, like why we were almost there and then when it stayed. Is there anything in what we're working on now together where what we're hoping we would achieve through the bill is vulnerable to sort of, I'll just call it backsliding in a way?
No,
Okay,
yes, to be clear, this is just enhancing the wetland rules and wetland protection to make sure we are we have that net gain, so we are mitigating at a 2:1 ratio for wetlands. And those are class 1 and class 2 wetlands. Section C of section 918, section part C, same language again, the greater than 5,000 square feet. And then it's reiterating that wetland, river, and floodplain restoration projects, including dam removals, should not require wetlands permit under this rule. So similar to what was stated above, again.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
So, you sent the committee this document,
yes, I believe Jared did.
okay, and has it been sent to Mr. O'Grady as well?
No, sir.
Okay, if you could please send it, if you could please send it to him, that'd be great. Thank you.
And Mr. Quinn, just so I understand, what is the collection of people that have, or organizations that have said, hey, these are what we're looking for changes? Is it just VM?
No, so it's the Water Caucus, I'm not sure if there's any more beyond the Water Caucus, so that includes the Nature Conservancy, Lake Champlain Committee. Trout Unlimited, Audubon Vermont. And Conservation Law Foundation,
Watershed United.
Watershed United, Connecticut River Conservancy,
Okay, that's,
I'm sure there's others there as well.
okay, so this has been a wide swath of
Yeah.
people who have taken some time. So we don't need to individually hear from those folks to,
And that, so a week ago, when everyone was in, we please work together and come up with a policy.
And Watershed United Vermont, that was the.
They've been doing that. And so, you know, I've asked him to have it sent to Mike O'Grady, so he has the language firsthand and those, doesn't necessarily, you know, for anyone watching, it's not like, oh, it's like, this is, everything we see automatically goes in, but I wanna make sure the lawyer has the text and helps us not have any oopses on and rewriting. So I'm figuring we'll do a pretty strike all. And we'll have a next round.
okay, so there's not, we don't, as we're going through as committee members, I don't need to say, okay, yes. We're assuming that most of this, depending on our conversation, will just be strike all amendment in here.
Sure, and I think, you know, let's ask questions and dig in as we go, not necessarily just an overview and then come back to it. But I do want to start sort of, I keep calling it, and painting ourselves out of the room, make edits, have a next draft. Let's keep making concrete steps towards votable bill.
Okay, thank you.
And then thanks for that question too, because last night when I was working on calendar, my hope is that 2 weeks from this Friday, which will be the 13th, I think, of February, no,
That would be a Tuesday.
sorry, the 9th of February, that we would be finished in book with the law.
Oh, great, okay, good to know the timeline.
Okay, moving along. This is the last edit for the wetlands section under section 918D. And that is just changing the code, so the hydrologic unit code. So from 12 to 8. So 12 is a smaller watershed and 8 is a larger watershed. And there was a little bit of concern both in conversations with Lauren LaPierre for the wetlands program, as well as Ducks Unlimited, who we also connected with on this. That when we can't do mitigation on site and we have to look for mitigation off site for wetland enhancement. That economically, can be really hard to find projects within the Huck 12 watershed, so that's thinking like. Huntington River versus Winooski River, so the Huntington is a tributary to the Winooski, the Huntington is a Huck 12, the Winooski is a Huck 8, so. Expanding the watershed size to look for mitigation projects when we have to look offsite.
So I'm just trying to think like, so the West River. What would be an example?
I don't know the West River as well, because I mostly work in the Lake Champlain Basin. I wonder. Do you know Jason?
I think one off the top of my head,
Yeah.
would be Hot 12.
I
Yes.
can find out for you.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely the area that we're looking at.
Right. But the West River itself would be a Huck 8.
Okay, so this would now. Versus, okay,
So, but versus before it would have been, if it happened on a tributary to the West River, then that tributary would have to stay in that tributary.
so it's now. I guess the reverse numbers are what's confusing me, is because 12 is smaller than 8 in this example. So it's now a larger area, but the concern that might come up is. Are those is this? you bring up a Chittenden County example.
Yeah.
So I would love to know if it actually has examples in other parts of the state that expand that to make it reasonable.
Certainly. Another example on the Lamoille River would be the Brewster River, which flows from Smuggler's Notch down into the Lamoille. So like the Brewster is a Huck 12, and I'm speaking where I live regionally, so those are the rivers I'm most familiar with.
That makes sense.
But then the Lamoille is the Huck 8. So it would open up the mitigation to happen anywhere in the Lamoille watershed,
Okay.
which is a much bigger watershed
Yes,
than the actual Brewster.
okay,
And that was something Julie Moore recognized in her testimony too, is just having that offsite flexibility is important. When we're looking for projects for restoration and mitigation.
okay, thank you.
Yeah,
So you're still in the same watershed,
same watershed,
but it's just you have more scope to go looking for a project.
exactly. And with that, would it be helpful for me to leave my computer up, so I'll let you guys.
That's great.
Nice.
I'm just looking at my map.
Yeah, well,
We'll have one before we leave. Good morning, committee. For the record, Lauren Oates, Director of External Affairs with the Nature Conservancy. Thanks for inviting us back in. Karina just wrapped up the wetlands and I'm going to tackle the rivers section as best I can, but would love a phone friend if need be on either side from here. So you heard quite a bit of testimony, rather compelling testimony, I might say, especially from the biggest cities and towns and the regional planning commissions last week, especially around this component of the bill. Most of the recommendations that I made here were either directly addressed and supported by the regional planning commissions in their testimony or have since followed up and they're agreed to them as well. So outside of the wetlands and dams part that's specific to this.
I mean, you've been in touch with Pat Wallace or.
I've been in touch with-
Baker?
Tasha Wallace, Charlie Baker, Chris Campany, I think are the three that you've heard from in testimony.
Yeah, okay.
And Peter Gregory and I talked about this first change more than a year ago. I think I can actually credit him for the recommendation. So the first change that we would make is actually related to the mapping outlined in number 4. And that is to change what is now designated centers in the draft bill language and swap that to existing settlement, which is defined elsewhere in statute.
So we take out development.
Take out designated centers. I don't know if you all can see the cursor, you can,
Strike through designated centers as currently drafted.
and swap that to existing settlement. Pursuant to this statute. The regional planning commissions, and through my testimony, last week or the week before, also talked a bit about the need for, robust and appropriate mapping around this issue. If we're going to say we need to reconsider where we're developing in these high hazard areas while also recognizing Vermont's historic settlement patterns and where we've already invested significant municipal infrastructure, stormwater, sewer, et cetera. That we really need to identify those existing settlements and do a mapping process that would not only be, it would be led by the Agency of Natural Resources, but it would be in collaboration with, you see in this red text here, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the Vermont Regional Planning Commissions. If there are no questions on that.
And that was, sorry, trying to stand back up, so it was previously assigned just to the agency? Is that who was leading it and now we're?
Yeah, so through rulemaking,
Yeah.
there would be a mapping process that would be led by the Department of Environmental Conservation Rivers Program, they're the ones that mapped the river corridor back in 2015.
Okay.
So through a remapping effort, really identify those areas suitable for development, but make sure that the regional planning commissions and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development are at that table to help inform more robust and perhaps like appropriate mapping for infill or for development.
And you can say, oh, we're gonna get to it. One of the things we heard from municipalities was they also wanted, I think, to be part of mapping. So I don't know if this is the stage at which they would come in or. Just thinking, you know, that one of my notes from the last week is maps are political and the use of maps is political. So we heard from like Ken Brady that I think they were happy to see proposed changes, which was a surprise to him in terms of like asking the state to take something over. But it sounded like he was also saying, they'd like to have, you know, seat at the table as the maps are drawn in terms of ground truthing them or bringing local knowledge to how things are drawn. Is that part of the way you're envisioning the process working?
Yeah, that I see as a fundamental role and value add of having the regional planning commissions on the table. They really act as our primary liaison between state government and municipal government, and they can bring that, you know, they are the ones that generally help in the design of the municipal plans, regional plans, and can bring the municipal voice to the table. But I would certainly make a recommendation that you bring back in any one of the RPCC for comment, make sure that they think that that's captured in municipal voice sufficiently. And then I think there's only one more change that we're recommending here, and that is around this, what can largely be captured as native riparian vegetation management. Over the past couple of years, actually, a handful of us on the Water Caucus, Karina just mentioned the groups that are involved in it, have been looking at the flood hazard area, the recorder rule, and speaking with DEC Rivers program staff to really figure out this native riparian vegetation issue. And both of those groups, both the Water Caucus groups and technical agency staff, have acknowledged that vegetative management is currently a gap in the existing rule. So instead of the recommendation as currently outlined in the draft bill for having this be discretionary rulemaking, to just fold it into the full rulemaking process, since they're going to be redesigning the expanded rule, go ahead and fold in that gap too, so they can address it outright.
Right. Yeah, riparian buffers and have sort of coming into focus and out of focus in the last few weeks, so.
Yeah, it's certainly part of the river riparian system.
Bruce.
Please. And then I think that's before I go on, so before I give the chair to Jared, I did just wanna acknowledge some testimony that you all heard last week from the agency. And there were a couple of recommendations that were made that I'd like just an opportunity to address now, recognizing that we're still going to be waiting for discrete language recommendations from them. But as I said in my testimony, the way that I've really been looking at this portion of the bill, at least, is to address what is largely like a 3 to 4 problem. First and foremost, a public safety problem with respect to our rivers. Second is the extreme cost of these flooding disasters that's borne on Vermont taxpayers. The third is what you heard really eloquently described by the League of Cities and Towns and the Regional Planning Commissions as the municipal burden right now to navigate this patchwork regulatory landscape that we find ourselves in. And the fourth is really around the natural resource itself and protecting the natural resource. So as I heard it in testimony last week from the agency, there were 2 general recommendations that were made. The first was around creating perhaps a statewide minimum standard for the National Flood Insurance Program. When I look at those 4 buckets and figure out what that would solve for, it doesn't solve for the public safety component because it's not related really to the river corridor, which is where 80% of our damages are. It doesn't solve really for the cost of disasters, again, 80% of damages in the river corridor. And it definitely doesn't solve for the administrative burden on our municipalities. It actually, depending on what the language ends up to be, it actually might create more burden on municipalities because the state can come up with a new minimum standard and then try to get towns to adopt them and reorient around new standards. And again, I would really recommend you bring back in the Regional Planning Commission so they can speak they can speak to it. They really do ground truth what happens in municipalities when state standards and recommendations come out. And the second recommendation I heard was around expanding the Act 250. Oh, go ahead.
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about that specific thing you were just talking about before you move on.
Yeah.
Which is, I actually like that the agency is coming up with a minimum standard proposal. And so I'm intrigued to hear your trepidation with it. My understanding is they would be able to offer technical support to the municipalities in a broader way if they had this minimum standard. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that. If, I mean, we don't have language before us, so we don't know. But could you see it being something that you would have less trepidation with if there was built-in technical support required that the state offer?
So I don't think that I have much trepidation behind this. I don't think that there's any true problem with it, aside from, and this again is where I would lean heavily on talking to the RPCs to say, how would a new statewide standard that has to then be adopted by the municipalities, how would that actually work in implementation? It doesn't exacerbate public safety, it doesn't exacerbate cost of disaster, so there's no trepidation.
It doesn't fix it, it's not one,
Yeah, it's,
oh,
yeah,
I understand. But it could, because I think your point around the burden for municipalities is the one that would make me decide whether or not I'm in favor of ANR's proposal. So do you think that we'll talk to the RPCs,
Yeah.
because they would be most likely the facilitators of some technical support.
and the Rivers program staff already do offer technical support to municipalities around the National Flood Insurance Program minimum standards, around river border development, and it's often through, recommended adoption of higher standards or the river border municipal bylaws.
Okay.
Those bylaws, that map you saw is very small on river corridor. For NFIP, it's 90% of our towns have adopted them, but compliance is tricky. And doesn't necessarily adhere to the full 90%. Asking towns again to really navigate the federal bureaucracy around minimum standards. If there's a statewide minimum standard, my understanding would be that would solve for a lot of the education outreach inefficiencies with the state, because they're going out to all the towns saying the same thing. It's not, the town of Bethel has, they have adopted these standards for the NFIP, and then Stockbridge was created. I'm trying to really speak.
You really are.
The town of Stockbridge has said, we're just going to do the bare minimum, so they have to create different, the way they communicate to the towns is different. If there was a statewide standard, it would be, the whole state has agreed that we should recommend adoption of the towns, but still, there wouldn't be a requirement, as I understand it, for the towns to adopt it.
So if I'm understanding your point correctly, you're not against the idea of state minimum, but the idea of doing a state minimum is not a catch-all solve for the problem that we're dealing with.
If that is being offered instead of the river border protection that is in here, then it would be problematic.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you.
Karen Carmick.
Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed here. I apparently have been wrong for years. I thought
That's not
that the rivers, the waters are the waters of the state.
public transport, yes.
Yeah, and that the White River through Bethel is not Bethel's river, it's Vermont's river. And then when it goes over the line into Royalton, it is not Royalton's rivers.
The H2O molecules themselves, yes. The land underneath, the land between the river corridor and the floodplain is not, so it is an interconnected intermunicipal system that is not truly protected from a flood resilience component by public trust.
The land, between the land and the water.
Yeah, those areas
That's
are
what
really
it
flooded.
Between high water and low water. But between high water and low water belongs to the town.
So yeah,
Is Rachel,
Between high water and low water is under the jurisdiction of the town.
I'm still not following. I'm sorry.
Okay, you got,
Nobody asked.
okay. You,
It's,
where the water ends and the land begins changes almost daily.
Yeah.
Okay, so it changes profoundly over the course of the year. there is that space there where sometimes it's underwater and sometimes it's not.
That is largely what the river border floodplain is.
Yeah,
River border.
that is
That
under
is-
the jurisdiction of kind of.
Unless Act 250 is triggered, unless Section 248, the PUC, the large energy projects is triggered. Then yes,
How would Act 250 get triggered? You don't build there.
if somebody were to propose, if there was a proposal that would trigger Act 250, then DEC Rivers Program would get to review. And they don't actually have full jurisdiction over that, they would just make recommendations back to the district who then gets to decide. And this is what we're asking our municipalities to navigate right now.
I can't remember if you
It's
showed the slide, there was a house they built, you know, right next to a river, and in one picture, there was a pretty big yard. In the other picture, the house was hanging in the air.
Yeah.
Neither of which, I think that was Mike Pine's slide, neither of which he said, I think there was like a telephone or utility pole in the middle of the river. And then the house hanging over the cliff, because it had been eroded out, it's like neither of these are in the FEMA floodplain.
Yes.
So to explain that how hazardous that river border area is, it's not protected currently. And then the final recommendation that I heard, speaking of Act 250, was to allow the actual permitting of Act 250 projects by DEC staff. So that would solve for some back-end inefficiencies within the Act 250 review process. It would actually allow DEC River staff, when they receive an Act 250 permit, to have a yes or no, yep, we actually say that you can and cannot. And it doesn't go back to the district then to make the final decision. A couple of decisions that Rivers Program have made in the past when they've only had recommendations to the district have actually resulted in really high hazard development that's gone all the way to the Supreme Court a couple of times over. So that would solve for an administrative burden, but it doesn't actually, again, public safety, you're not expanding the area river corridor protected or the area that future Vermonters would be protected from the river corridor. It doesn't decrease cost of disasters. And again, it still will require municipalities to have to navigate that patchwork jurisdiction, so. Again, I'll wait to hear and see language recommended by the agency, but I just wanted to flag it. Those are some ideas that I heard last week that I wanted the chance to respond to.
So, Mike,
Do you, Mr. Chair, thank you, do you know if we will have recommendations from ANR within the week on this, or it's through the?
I had hoped we would have them today.
Okay.
But. Because they were busy doing things.
They got some
And
stuff
the
in there.
secretary has been away until last night. They couldn't finish their own review and edits in order to join us today or tomorrow. So they requested Tuesday, so we'll be from them Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
And then while they're here, I might just recommend then, you heard from everybody so far that this will take staffing.
Yeah.
At the agency, we haven't recommended an appropriations just because we haven't heard necessarily what the staff capacity need would be from the agency, so it would be. We would all support appropriating funding for the staff to actually get to do this work. We just would like to see what that language would be, but we're probably certainly supporting.
Great, thank you. And not to be mysterious at all, I mean, it's better to be transparent, so I've said for a week now, like 15 to 20 seems a little hard. Frankly, for me to imagine the legislature stepping up and authorizing. Especially with because it's this ongoing expense, and then we would also need to find money for the damage program.
Yeah.
So navigating the budget pressures we're under, one of the things. And from sort of a practical implementation standpoint, sort of going from 0 to 60, 0 to 20 people doing something. How might we sort of have a timeline to build to that? So for myself, just trying to solve for getting to doing sort of the fully regulated program we're envisioning, I think, is there a stepwise progression? And so that's what, I get in here, and I made up a sort of a little timeline on the board this morning to try to illustrate to Mason what I was talking about, and those are totally fictitious, like the dates, 2024, 2031, whatever. But what's shown there is the first one is, M is for mapping, which I'm guessing precedes to some degree. The regulations that might follow. Underneath, there's R to C. The river corridors, followed by RF, river floodplains. And then there's sort of a floating underneath there is wetlands and dams, so where would they fit in? How would you build a sensible program that would get us all the way where we wanna be, but you would do it in steps that would make it probably easier. A higher likelihood of a successful implementation by not trying to do too much too fast, and it probably would make it more affordable, but that's just the seat of the pants, sort of based on experience in the building, how we might build something that could make it all the way through, so.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I should admit that I haven't done my full homework yet, but I have not gotten a budget book or looked at the governor's budget yet. You know, normally they float around and they give it to folks. I do not happen to serve on a committee where they hand out the binders for any of those things. You do, is my understanding. Finance gets a binder.
We need to have one.
Oh, you go,
It
okay.
used to come out of that budget address and there would be a
Yeah.
table covered with budgets.
Yeah, I would love, so do we know what their recommendation for staffing, have they leveled it? Is it the same?
You know, thanks for that question. I don't know the answer. The only thing I'm aware of, I think there's $1 million for dams, you know, I don't know if that's revolving loan fund
Yeah,
million or if it's staffing related. So we have our homework to do on the money side of things.
Where would or is it appropriate for a member of Natural Resources to request a section of the budget for the A and R budget? Cause I don't understand what they're proposing for staffing changes or increases. Cause they've noted that they would consider making certain people full-time, but I don't,
Let me, I mean, you could.
I guess I could look online, but.
Yeah, part of it, so it depends.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So for the record, Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. The executive summary of the budget is out, which is 30 some odd pages or so, and that has some of the line items. in it.
Okay.
And that does have the $1 million for the state revolving loan fund. It's got $500,000 for match money to the Army Corps for the flood mapping of the Winooski River Basin, a couple of other things. The A&R budget, I don't think has been released yet.
Oh.
Normally, when that's released is when the agency, whichever agency it is, goes and testifies in front of council appropriations, and they come into the PowerPoint in the books and the little time and yes. So now this is for me, if it's coming from a committee chairman, maybe they'd be more willing, but I haven't seen anything in terms of staffing levels, DEC, how much the wetlands program is gonna get, you know, all those sort of the details, so to speak, just sort of those. Just sort of the PR version of the executive summary of the line items and then so.
Yes, this just feels.
Yeah, so to your point, thank you both. My note to myself is request A&R budget and see what level of detail we can get at this point.
It just would shock me if they had made no increased staffing changes after the flooding. Right.
I used to have the booklet on the day of the speech. It
Yes,
passed out for
you're happy.
when you left, the house changed.
At least leadership.
And used to be available to
Not disappointed, maybe that's the. So again, good morning, committee, first time sitting in the chair of this session, so this is from this perspective, Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. I'm here to talk about the dam safety section. We have a few suggestions along, just a little full background because now I'm not an expert on a lot of this stuff. I might have to be on Karina for a few things, but you haven't talked as much about the dam safety section as you have other parts of the bill. It has a few components that allows for not only for better inspection and enforcement of dams, but also creates a unsafe dam revolving loan fund to help with loans for dam repairs under specific circumstances, emergencies and non-emergencies. But one thing to bear in mind is when we talk dam safety at this level, we're not necessarily talking about or just talking about the big ones like Wrightsville and Waterbury and what's the flood control around down on the Lucid, remember?
Union Village.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Union Village Dam. There are something like
That in your. No,
That is, where it is in ours.
There are estimated to be about 1,200 dams in the state. People don't have an exact number really, because they're the little broken down mill dams that are, and those ice dams that are 100 years old, but somebody owns them. Almost all of them have impoundments except for they're breached, and a lot of them, if they fail, they are gonna, a lot of them will cause damage downstream, either to property. Or, you know, be it personal property or a house or a culvert or a state road or something. So we're talking about dam safety on that level of scale, not just sort of the big eye catching of it.
And will render many towns just having lost tax base. Because houses are no longer on the water side, on the water.
One of the dams in question was the Hans Mill Dam above Barry on the Stevens Branch, and that went in the July flood and caused a lot of its. Thought it caused a lot of the sedimentation in Barry and caused more damage than would have otherwise caused if that dam. Now, ironically, that one had been slated for removal for a number of years and was delayed, but this is something that our organizations, when it comes down, push comes to shove, we would rather see the dam removed than the dam repaired. The safest dam is the dam that's not there. And the river is restored back to the way it was before, but as you go from dam to dam, so to speak, there's nostalgia with some of them, and some of them do have uses in terms of a skating pond behind them or what have you, so it's really. It's, a lot of them are privately municipally owned, so there are owners that have to make the decision, so that's sort of a. Top level, so to speak, before getting into some of the details.
I have a quick question. So you know how detailed the dams get? For instance, there's that very, I don't even know if you would call it a dam, but either railroad trestle right down here where the North Range comes in, there's that sort of a little hole.
That's called the Rat Dam.
The rat.
Damn.
That was literally created as a little spillover, so yes, it's all about this high off the water normally, because at one point in time, this was decades ago, the rats would swim up the river. And they'd go into the sewer pipes into the town, so they put a little dam in called the Rat Dam, that's the one right behind Shaw's.
Yeah.
Yes, that has been, Vermont Fish Conservancy has looked into removal, I don't know what level they are, removal of the Rat Dam, what's known as Bailey's Dam, which is the one that goes across the Winooski under the bridge next to Shaw's. How did it work? In the Pioneer Dam. How it kept the rats out, someone played not sure. I don't know. No, I rats, go around, I think rats are fairly good swimmers too, so, but that
And good
is.
climbers, good everything.
Yeah.
But that was the impetus for that little low spillover, or like space, but it's called the Rat Dam, which is actually breached in one point.
Yeah.
So no, we would be talking about, everything down to the level of the Rat Dam, so to speak. But the Bailey's Dam is an ice dam, one was created for ice flows. And that's the one, that's right next to Shaw's and the bridge as you come over, so that's one that's been considered, is it doing any good, or is it just sort of there potentially creating an hazard? So, some general changes, that we would like to see. I think you have all discussed S-218, Senator Westman's bill about adding 3 staffers to the dam safety program. I think we support this, whether or not it would go into this bill or necessarily to budget separately at some point, what the process would be. That makes logical sense. I think you heard the testimony from Ben Green with the program that they have 5 people right now, but 2 are limited service positions. So I think this would be for 3 new people, possibly making those 2 limited service positions into a full. And for a total of, I think, 6 staffers. This seems like a no-brainer to us.
From the Department of Belt and Suspenders drafting, I think 218 might well end up in our bill, and maybe it also end up in the budget, but just to ask twice, not at all.
So the second general change that we would suggest is, this is a touch more complicated, and I'll do my best. We would like to see what's called a jurisdictional transfer from the PUC to DEC of a certain number of dams. So there's a House bill, H 615, Act relating to the transferring safety jurisdiction over certain hydroelectric dams.
Who introduced it?
Representative Head. It has basically 2 main provisions. There are there are 23 dams right now that are under the jurisdiction of the PUC and not the dam safety program at DEC. The reason behind that always sort of escapes me, but I think it's because they're pre-FERC jurisdiction dams, correct? So these are dams that have sort of been left in history, so to speak. And they are, there's 23 of them, and 10 of them, some of them are significant. There's 10 of them are high or significant hazard dams. And some larger ones are the dam up in Marshfield, Chittenden, Middlesex Dam, and actually Joe's Pond Dam in West Danville is a PUC dam. So this would transfer, I think it's important to note that the PUC, they don't have any dam safety engineers. There's no biologists, stream ecologists. They are the sort of historical of why they're over there. So this will transfer those dams over to the DEC to be under the jurisdiction of the dam safety program, who would handle, well, they already do the inspections, but sort of subcontracted by PUC. It's really a matter of efficiency, but why aren't all the dams over at the dam safety program in terms of jurisdiction? A second provision that would also be transferred over is the determination of the certificate of public good. So basically the permit for the dam's operation. But under the determination of public good, I'll just have to read here. It means the greatest benefit for the people of the state is public good. They have to give due consideration to, among other things, the effect the proposed project will have on quantity, kind, and extent of agriculture, scenic and recreational values, fish and wildlife, impacts on the forest and forest programs, existing uses, including for the public, including boating, fishing, swimming, other recreational. There's a list of 14 things: public safety, water qualities, hazards. A lot of this expertise is over at DEC. I mean, they have Fish and Wildlife Department, they have the Rivers Program, they have Parks and Rec. So it makes sense for the certificate of public good and for the dam safety inspections of all of this to be transferred over to from PUC to DEC. I would ask them directly. It's my understanding that both the ANR and the PUC are in favor of this transfer. It's a matter of the time. What would it be? Would it occur after phase 2 in 2026? Phase 2 dam safety regulation is finished. There's a question of whether some of them should be under the jurisdiction of FERC, needs to be looked into. So it's a little bit of it'll be a couple years process on the timeline, Mr. Chair, but we think this is something, we talked about this in the 2018 dam safety bill, and it was removed for various reasons, but we would wish the committee would consider it this time.
Sure. Have you talked to any utilities that
Yeah.
are currently regulated?
I have not. It is my understanding through the grapevine that they would have concerns of all of this going over and would rather keep some of it at PUC. We could come back and argue that in front of you again. We would prefer that everything would be moved over to the PUC.
Sure.
Excuse me. Please.
So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've encouraged them to come and speak to the committee and sooner rather than later. And the concern I've heard so far, they'll need to characterize their own concerns, is that scope of review for a CPG at ANR might be broader than the scope of review at PUC and include factors that would diminish their ability to generate power.
I could see how that would be a concern, but as long as it's, I mean, to me, it sounds like one would want to go and argue in front of the PUC on why it shouldn't be all water quality standards, or why it shouldn't be fully safely inspected.
I'm already, I'm at the out of my comfort zone for characterizing anyone else's.
And I might be mischaracterizing the thought process, but I think it might be over in the essence.
Which is why we'll invite them in to make their own case. Senator White, Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have and I would love to know what the 23 dams are that we're talking about specifically. I would love that. And I'd also like to understand how much power are they generating? And in the same way that it sounds like you're concerned that the PUC is monitoring and keeping track of these for the safety aspect being higher, I am also concerned that DEC is not experts in the power generating side.
Right.
So I can understand why a utility may say, hey, we've got different preferences on how we're regulated. But I'd like to understand what the amount of power these dams are creating is, and are we about to open a can of worms
Completely understand.
So I would like to understand.
I don't know if I necessarily have how much power they're generating on some of the information I have, but obviously great PUC question.
Okay,
And I would suggest, obviously, somebody from PUC comes in and discusses all of this.
how connected are they to, you know, when you have a flooding event and you might lose power? Would there be issues with DEC making a decision
Mhm.
that could, the PUC would say, no, this is actually more critical for access to electricity
Correct.
versus the dam, you know, like where would the risk fall?
Where does that
Because
fall?
there are times that I can see having a lack of electricity being more dangerous in certain circumstances than potentially what impacts a
Of
dam.
course, now I'm not actually,
But I don't know.
no, and I'm not sure of the level of communication right now, I'm sure it's fairly extensive between the two. But I think it would. Yes, to what you were saying, have it lie with, maybe each aspect lies with whomever has the expertise in that.
That's great, yeah, okay. But I hear what you're saying, so thank you.
Well, and this has come up already for like Morrisville, when they went through relicensure. So there's a federal 401 delegated responsibility at ANR. I think it's an EPA task, you know, there's 401 review, which is what are you doing to fish and wildlife in the river
Yeah,
as you run your dam? And so there have been historical practices where they impound lots of water. So that then for the winter, they could draw down. Meanwhile, you're dropping the water level, things that live in the water get less comfortable when the water starts to disappear. So they said, maybe you should manage the river more to take care of wildlife and then more spill of water. Electric says, but now we can't generate as much power.
yeah,
And that is, I think, a tension that's living in the background of this discussion.
okay,
But we're really focusing on dam safety.
yes.
And I think there's other people who go, well, yeah, but what are you doing to us as a business? I totally legitimate concern, so we'll have them in and hear from them.
The Morrisville discussion is still ongoing.
Senator McCormick, thank you for waiting.
This is about dams. To what extent does it also look upstream of the dam? In other words, at the impoundment. The dam forms the lake. To what extent is this stress goings on in the lake?
The jurisdictional transfer or 213 itself?
All of it.
All of it. That's actually a very good question, but what the chair was just talking about, with the rivers program under the Clean Water Act, section 401, which you're just talking about in terms of the permitting. So you need to get a 401 review and a water quality certificate. EPA delegates it to the state, but when they look at that, they look at the impoundment up above in terms of recreation and environmental impacts. When you're drawing down the water, what it does it do to a littoral zone, and especially in the winter time, and all the little amphibians and creatures are hibernating in the mud. That is often looked into. In terms of dam safety, I believe the impoundment is the height of the impoundment is reflected in the hazard level of high hazard and significant hazard in terms of how much water is going to go downstream. So that would be looked at by the dam safety program. I'm gonna look at Karina if I could, Mr. Chair, because she knows this area better than I do.
And so dam safety has jurisdiction over the extent of the impoundment, if that impoundment is holding back 500,000 cubic feet of water. So it's how much water that impoundment is holding defines whether they have jurisdiction or not.
How much is it? Is that?
And it's pre-breach, so if there was a breach. On the dam, so you're looking at an old derelict dam, but it originally held back 500,000 cubic square feet, then it's that
Give
amount.
me a frame of reference. Let's say Silver Lake and Barnard and Bombazine. How much water is in both of those?
Both of those are, I can't tell you how much water is in both of those, but I can say they both fall under jurisdiction.
So they are,
Yes, yes,
So,
as is the Bailey Dam here. 500,000, yeah, is not very much.
It's like when,
And then there's the Richelieu Dam, is it, that the one that holds up Lake Champlain?
well, what I'm wondering
Is that
is,
correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
I'm wondering if this is something where we might want to implicate the issue of the wake boats. And maybe the answer is no, and maybe the answer is of course not what he's phrasing, but.
I wouldn't characterize it that way, Senator. That issue has many.
From the way coach.
There are times when my colleagues ask things where I don't say it, but.
Did you say we go to a torpedo?
It's a man submarine with a torpedo.
Thanks for searching stuff. Good angle. If we can't do it, I'd say.
I think when Mr. Green was in here before and he was talking about this. And did some math on the side, that 500,000 is something like 2 acres and 10 feet.
Well, okay.
It was not a very, maybe wrong, but it's not, was not a.
I seem to remember when we had this discussion back before, that it was, I wanted to say there's a certain number of Olympic swimming pools, but now I can't exactly remember.
It's not a tremendous amount.
So, that's that's the jurisdictional one. I have 2 more. These are more specific. They're proposed changes to specific language in the bill. If you go into, to page 18, section 11, starts talking about the dam safety revolving loan fund. Couple of things. One was, as was mentioned before, the governor, there's no money in here because the agency, we had started talking about a lot of this section, some of the advocates, folks from the agency back in, November. We started, we still didn't come to agreement on everything in these sections, but we have spent a lot of time talking about this. But the dam safety revolving loan fund, in the governor's proposed budget, adds $1 million into the fund. It's a start, it's not a lot, but it's something. And the way this is, so the thought process.
Question, sorry.
Yes.
There's a predecessor fund, right? It's that when we're changing the name to dam safety, but it's like, dam.
Yes.
The Dangerous Dam Loan Fund.
It is called the, once upon a time, or before this, is called the Unsafe Dam Revolving Loan Fund.
Right, so now it's been rebranded, it's a happier name.
I believe it has
Is there money there?
$40,000 to $80,000 in it. That's a good question for
And do you know anything about the history of allocations to that?
I don't think it's been used very often, maybe once or twice.
I believe it had 50,000 in it,
Okay,
but then I think some of that money was utilized post-July flood event.
oh, correct.
That's the like.
So wait, you said 480,000? Is in what?
I said 40 to 80 and that's
Oh.
50.
Oh, that is a much different number than I heard,
But we should confirm that with Ben.
Right,
but
So
so
that-
under 100 grand.
Not much money to
It
get
is.
anything
right.
to start with.
And so the thought process was to create a dam safety revolving loan fund. So of course, a revolving loan fund in the same way as the drinking water revolving loan fund, that you would get the loan and pay it back. So theoretically, you would put in a chunk of money and it would be replenished. You wouldn't have to keep appropriating year after year. There was some discussion, and the discussion will continue on whether or not some of those loans should become grants, should be subsidized in certain scenarios. Of course, there might be cases where someone can't afford the loan and it should be granted or in an emergency. But that gets back to whether or not this is a revolving loan fund versus just a grant program, and you're gonna have to keep replenishing.
So
So
you talk to institutions at all about this?
I have not thought to either.
We actually do that. We're just trying to remember the balance in the drinking water. I mean, we have other loan funds related to water quality, and some of them are much more, a lot of them.
There is, the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund and the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund do have a considerable multiple millions in them. They are constrained to use by federal EPA standards. They can be used for, I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure if this will qualify.
No, sorry, I don't
Oh,
mean
my
to
apologies.
imply that we would borrow money from that fund or that, but just that. To try to look at precedent for like, what kind of level of funding have we come up with for something that we deem essential?
Okay,
You know, like, hey, dam seems pretty essential, and so do those things.
I can talk to.
It's also a long term, other than, well, it's a little weird on dam removal, but. If you're investing in dam maintenance, then it's really a pretty straightforward capital investment. You're building. You're making a capital investment for long. And so that seems like a legitimate expense to expense out over the generations that are gonna use that. It's me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think, I don't think your intent was to try to think of a way that we could get more funding for this, but
It is.
with the clean water, with that other pool of money.
Oh, no, I don't wanna, a water quality program to work on dams.
But I do think there could be arguments made that there are certain instances where the removal of the dam could improve water quality. So are they using that at all now? To make that, is there anyone who has used that fund, or is there a way that we could potentially expand it to let someone use?
Clean water revolving loan fund.
Yeah, I mean, could you make an argument?
I can get to it.
Yeah, it's because. I don't know, I'm not trying to say that they should.
If they're a lawyer,
Yeah. I'd be intrigued by that, because maybe we should be flagging that for folks,
But in this-
if there is a way that that would be improving the water quality.
But in the same regards, we also go back to, what we would really like funding to go to is not repair of dams, it's to removal of dams, and now we have the more benefit for water quality and habitats and all sorts of things as well, and so.
So could-
We have always been hesitant about putting so much money in the repair fund that we're just repairing our dams and not removing our dams. Now, some need repairs, especially in case of emergency, and that's one of the sections, there's an emergency section and a non-emergency section, so. We just wanna be careful, of course, that if, action is taken if there's an actual emergency, but if it's a non-emergency and the dam is failing. And somebody owns the dam and is deriving a benefit from that dam, should they necessarily pay for that, keeping and maintaining that dam out of their own pocket, and rather than out of state or federal money that could go towards. Drinking water infrastructure, that's just one of those.
Yeah, it's kind of like the buyout, it's like a buyout conversation, even a dam buyout program.
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
If we were talking only an hour ago about megawatts, you could have like mega dams.
what if us to buy out the Greenfield Dam?
Yeah, I mean, there is a frame where I could see a dam buyout program, because I'm sure there are folks who. In the same way that when you do a buyout, hey, no more use of this. At all, that we could have stipulations for some of these loans. Where we'll turn it into a grant. If you choose to not do a repair, but instead do so I don't, this.
I mean, oftentimes.
Got me thinking about it.
No, it's great to this is what needs to be talked through, and oftentimes it's an order of a dam. Will like the benefit of it, but when they realize how much it's gonna cost to repair it, they start turning to removal, and they also. The 11 o'clock conversation, when they realize that they have liability for dam breaching and causing damage downstream, they start thinking of removal. And there are a few organizations that including one part of Karina's job, which is they get approached by people who have dams that they want removed, and these nonprofits, organizations, the NRC, CRC, others have been Friends of the Winooski River. Goes through the process of, okay, we need to get the engineers, we need to get the grant money, we'll take the dam out free of charge, but the dam is still. Coming out, rather than repairing it, and then you're coming back and looking at it. Well, it needs more repairs in 10 years, what is this, removal's permanent. So,
Yeah, can I just say one?
please.
And there are some instances, and this happened with the July flood. Where repair, so a short-term repair is needed. For the safety of the public downstream, and that repair is a breach. That also, so it's actually lowering the dam by 4 feet or so. With ultimate removal plans, so sometimes the repair is temporary and needed, so I think that's an.
And the repair doesn't need to so that's very helpful, because when I hear repair, I think holding back more water. But the repair could actually be. Making it so water flows quicker, exactly. Okay, you guys are on it.
So, number three, this falls under the non-emergency funding, which is page 20 down lines 4 and 5 would be a change. So in order to be eligible for non-emergency funding, there's factors, you have to meet factors A through A through F in order for eligibility. Ben Green, in one of his conversations, when he was up testifying, was in favor of what's called an alternatives analysis, like what are the alternatives to repairing the dam? We didn't want necessarily for it to be the responsibility of DEC, we understand that, there are engineering firms out there that do that. But we thought that we would fine tune a little bit, so to speak, the alternatives analysis language to include dam repair, rehabilitation, removal options, that considers floodplain, wetland restoration, water quality. So let's look at all the different factors that are out there and do an alternatives analysis, all the possibilities before we start loaning out non-emergency money, because there might be better alternatives. Section 12 in rulemaking, it's complementary to that. We would add the alternatives analysis and what factors would be engaged. We'd want that in the rulemaking to sort of flesh out all of the requirements. This is similar under F, so the alternatives analysis is E, but changes the qualification for loan subsidies. This is just adding that in order for a loan subsidy for a grant, there would also be engineering analysis, design, and construction, which actually is big yellow machines, so really it's deconstruction that results in the removal of the dam. And the final one that I have is actually something completely different, if I can, being Windows illiterate again, oh, there we go. This is something that the RPCs mentioned, and we went back and forth about a little conversation is in the basin plan. Right now, every basin has a tactical basin plan that is updated every 5 years. As this committee knows, they've seen them before, but we thought it would be opportunistic to add language that every time a basin plan is reviewed, it would also identify opportunities to mitigate impacts of severe precipitation events on communities through implementation of major bank restoration projects, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, look for opportunities for resilience projects within that basin, just in the same way they're looking at identifying other opportunities for wetlands and projects and water quality opportunities, and recreational opportunities and everything of that nature. This might be able to be worded much better, maybe Mr. O'Grady, I can.
Where is this? Where is?
This would be a brand new edition.
Okay, we don't have a section on this.
You don't have an amendment to basin planning section. This is,
Okay.
I think it was Charlie mentioned when he testified that it'll be, right, let's look at this in every basin planning opportunities for resilience projects.
Like, adjusting older practices to take care of current day realities.
Now, I have not floated this by the tactical basin program at DEC
Right,
and how they would think of it,
Yeah. I'm wondering what they would think.
but I don't know if
They
they
might
might
get nervous that we're adding more things for them to do.
Yeah.
And
correct.
it seems like certainly if we should have that conversation.
I would ask that you do so.
So when you're describing this type of basin planning, are you referring to like repairing buffers is that's like a mitigation? Like what would an example be that if they planned it and they said, actually, we need to do this, what would an example be?
I think it could be repairing plantings in certain areas. It could certainly be dam removals. It could be looking into erosion in certain areas. Capturing water and resilience. I mean, it could be any number of things.
Yeah, 'cause increased natural floodwater attenuation, I don't know what that term means. So is that?
Floodwater attenuation, I guess the best would be the retention. Floodwater retention, so floodplain preservations, where the water would dissipate into the floodplain rather than going into the town.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's gonna be